Johnson's a fighting man was he. Sailed to the east and he sailed to the west and he helped set America free. Davy was born and bred in Whitehaven. He was only a young lad. And his family, there was him and 5 brothers and sisters and his mum and his dad, and they lived in a house with 3 other sets of families, so the room was a bit tight and there was no me time or my space. He had to, quite young age, either go down the pit or go out to sea. Davy used to sit here on the edge of the harbour wall and he'd look out, breathe the salt air, freedom, that's what he saw. So the sea it was, and it was right here on this quay that he joined his first coal ship to Dublin. Things weren't quite as good for Davy as he thought they were going to be on board ship. When you start at that age and you're a cabin boy, then you get the worst jobs. The worst food, the worst rations, the worst cleaning to do, and the worst place to sleep. Their job was right at the front of the ship. So he'd hang his hammock at night time, and every time they went over a wave, he'd go up, and up, and down. It's enough to make anybody feel seasick, no matter how good you were at it. But he kept to it, and he went backwards and forwards on the boats from Dublin to Whitehaven, taking the coal. But after a while, he'd worked his way up to be a midshipman. And just like the name suggests, you then get to sleep in the middle of the ship, which is a lot safer on land. It was then that he decided he wanted a bit of adventure. So, he moved from the coal ships to tobacco ships that went all the way to America. And he went backwards and forwards across the Atlantic and really started to enjoy himself. He was very good at listening, not saying very much, but gathering information that he needed. And it was through doing that that he managed to hear what the sailors were saying. The Americans were all talking about revolution and let's get the British out of America. Davy wasn't really bothered by what they did. He was being paid and he was being fed, and that was fine. Until the day he ended up on a ship in France. A ship with a captain called John Paul Jones. Now you may have heard of him. He didn't start off as John Paul Jones, he started as John Paul and came from Cumbria in Scotland. But he joined the British Navy and didn't have a very good reputation. One guy he had beaten with the whip so hard that he died a week later, and another one he ran through with a sword for wanting more wages. It was at that time that the British Navy chucked him out, and he decided to add the Jones to his name, and he went to work for the Americans. The ship, the USS Ranger, was the first ever ship to fly the Stars and Stripes banner, and they were moored in France, because France were allies to America at the time. Davy joined the ship, and he kept his head down and he did his listening, and he gathered his information, and he heard on the grapevine that word had come through from America that they had to do something to scupper the British. They could do whatever they wanted as long as it played havoc. John Paul Jones just loved this idea. Get his own back at the British Navy. And where better to do it than Whitehaven? John Paul Jones set out from France to come up to Whitehaven. It was a huge, huge port in its day, and most of the coal for around the area came out of harbour. On the way, he managed to sink 5 British ships. Now normally, pirates, you might have heard, like this word called booty. And basically, they didn't get very good wages, but whenever they managed to capture and sink a ship, they were allowed to keep whatever treasure was on board and share it out amongst them, a bit like a bonus, a booty bonus. Except John Paul Jones was having none of it. 5 ships they sank, and the sailors on his ship saw not a penny. All the treasure went down with the ships. This they did not like at all. It took a while to get up to Whitehaven, but they did, and they moored about a mile offshore and waited for the dead of night. It was a moonless night, so they weren't going to be seen. About 30 of them got into the boat to row ashore. Davy made sure he was one of them. After all, he still had family living here in Whitehaven. He was a bit torn what to do, but he knew that if he was on the ship and he was at the heart of the action, he'd suddenly get an idea who was sure. So, Davy, along with a few of his crew members, made their way up to the harbour wall. The rowing boat went thud as it hit. He slowly climbed up the ladder, careful to make sure that his spikes didn't make too much noise in his bag. His job was to spike the cannons to stop them firing, ramming a piece of iron into the firing hole. There were 36 in all, and it didn't take them long. Davy then looked up and he looked over into the harbour, and even in the moonlight he could see a bit of a kerfuffle going on. He slowly made his way over to see what was happening. In the harbour here, there was around 200 to 400 ships, all laden with coal and tobacco, ready to go out on the morning tide. So they all sat quite low in the water. John Paul Jones's plan was to set light to the coal ships. The coal ships would then blow up and they'd set light to the town. And then supplies were scuppered. Unfortunately for John Paul Jones, he hadn't taken into account just how angry his men were at him not letting them have their booty bonus. Somebody, and I'm not telling tales who, but somebody forgot to bring the oil for the lantern to set fire to the boats. This started a bit of an argument when one of the sailors noticed a tavern on the side of the harbour. Well, they were bound to have oil, weren't they? When they got in, they had oil, and they had beer, and they had the odd keg of illegal rum under the counter too. Well, one drink wouldn't make any difference, would it? One drink led to 2 drinks, led to 3 drinks, led to a whole party. The noise that they made could be heard everywhere. People started to wake up in the town and wondered what was going on. The men started to come down to the harbour with swords and guns and anything else they could get their hands on. Davy took his opportunity. He slipped away from the rest of the group and went along the streets banging on the doors, shouting, "Invasion! Invasion!" People started to wake up and realise what happened, and soon the Americans were hightailing it out of here. John Paul Jones wrote in his diary when he sent his report back to the States that there was 10,000 people standing on this harbour, all totally shocked that they'd managed to get in. To say that there probably wasn't 10,000 people lived in Whitehaven at the time, it might have been a little bit of an exaggeration. But they did, they got in the ships and they hightailed out of here, and the Americans never did attack Whitehaven again. In fact, they never did attack anywhere in Britain again. The British Navy got their cannons and they fortified further along the coast when they realised just how vulnerable they were. Davy decided it maybe wasn't a good idea to go back to the ship with the rest of them. So he stayed here in Whitehaven, and he settled down and he worked on the harbour. And as he grew older, he would tell tales to the children of his adventures at high seas and pirates and treasure and sinking ships and night raids on Whitehaven. The children, of course, didn't really believe him. I mean, he was an old man. At this point, he wouldn't have done all that, would he? And then, of course, he changed his name and decided to add Jones at the end. So Davy Jones used to tell them about his locker that was hidden at the bottom of the sea. But that's another story. Jumbo Jones was a fighting man was he. Sailed to the east and he sailed to the west and he helped set America free. He fought in the rain and he fought in the sun and he fought in the moonlight too. He fought with his knife and he fought with his gun and he fought till the blood ran through. Jumbo Jones was a fighting man was he. Sailed to the east and he sailed to the west and he helped set America free. Oh, so they reckon.